Antonia Hernandez had spent her entire life being the perfect mother, giving, forgiving, and sacrificing everything for her son Orlando and his wife Elena. She believed love meant patience and silence. But one humiliating morning at the airport changed everything. Her own family, the people she had raised, protected, and funded for years, told her she didn't belong. They left her behind like she was nothing. What they didn't know was that Antonia wasn't just a lonely widow. She was the secret owner of the very airline they were flying with. That moment of betrayal became her rebirth. When the plane landed, Orlando and Elena discovered that the woman they had discarded was the real boss behind their luxury trip. What followed wasn't revenge. It was transformation. Antonia decided she would never again live begging for love or approval. She rebuilt her life from the ashes of humiliation, turning her hidden fortune into a force for change. She founded Invisible Mothers, a foundation helping thousands of older women who had been forgotten by their families, teaching them that dignity and self-worth. As her empire grew, Antonia didn't seek vengeance, she found peace. She traveled the world with her lifelong friend Juana, rediscovering joy, freedom, and the woman she had once been before. Years later, her son returned, not to control her but to learn from her. He had changed, but so had she. For the first time, their relationship was built on respect, not GUE. By 70, Antonia had turned her story of pain into one of global inspiration. From being humiliated at an airport to owning the skies she once wept beneath, she proved. It's never too late to reclaim your life. And never too late. Her journey became a reminder to millions of women. This trip is only for family, Michael said with that cold tone that froze my blood. I stood in the middle of the airport, suitcase in hand and heart shattering into pieces, as I watched my own son cross my name off the passenger list. Emma will be coming instead, he added, not even looking me in the eyes, as if I were some bothersome stranger. Laura, my daughter-in-law, smiled with that fake smile I knew so well. Go home and this isn't for you. Her words cut through me like knives, but what hurt the most was seeing everyone else look away. My own son, flesh of my flesh, the boy I had raised with so much love, couldn't even meet my eyes while humiliating me in public. But let me tell you how I got to that moment, because this story began 3 weeks earlier, when I still believed I was part of this family. The smell of cinnamon filled my kitchen as I prepared Michael's favorite orange cake. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the excitement I felt after hearing his voice on the phone. Mom, we have a surprise for you. He had said it in that sweet tone I hadn't heard in years. Family trip. All of us together. Those words had sounded like music to my ears. It had been so long since I'd felt visible in my son's life. Not since Laura had entered the picture and slowly pushed me out of everything. Family dinners had turned into intimate gatherings. Celebrations became small, exclusive events, just them. And I had become the tolerated inconvenience. A duty, not a desire. But this time felt different. This time they had included me, remembered me, invited me to be part of something special again. I spent days shopping for new clothes, going into every store at the mall looking for the perfect outfit. I wanted to look beautiful. I wanted Michael to feel proud of his mother. I bought a coral dress that made me look younger, comfortable but elegant shoes, and even treated myself to that pearl necklace I'd been admiring in the shop window for months. In the nights leading up to the trip, I couldn't sleep from excitement. I stayed awake imagining the conversations we'd have, the laughter we'd share, the pictures we'd take together. I imagined dinners under the stars, walks along tropical beaches, moments when I'd finally feel like I belonged in my son's life again. I packed and repacked my suitcase obsessively, each garment folded and refolded, every little detail carefully considered. I included my medication, books for the flight, and small gifts I'd bought for each of them. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted to prove that inviting me had been the right choice. The morning of the trip, I woke before dawn. I got ready with special care, choosing every detail of my appearance. The mirror showed the reflection of an older woman, but a dignified one, ready to reclaim the place she'd lost in her family's heart. I arrived at the airport an hour early, my heart pounding with nerves and joy. I searched the crowd for Michael and Laura, eager to see them, to begin this adventure I had dreamed of for weeks. When I finally spotted them near the check-in counter, something in their expressions made me hesitate. Michael looked tense, avoiding my gaze. Laura was whispering to another woman I didn't recognize at first. Emma, her friend. But what was she doing there if this was supposed to be a family trip? I approached with a smile, dragging my suitcase behind me, ready to greet them and start what I thought would be the best trip of our lives. "Good morning," I said, my voice filled with hope and emotion. That's when Michael looked at me for the first time that morning, and his eyes didn't hold the joy I expected to see. They held something much worse, pity mixed with irritation. "Mom," he began, and from that single word, I already knew something was terribly wrong. "We need to talk," he said again, and each word fell on me like drops of ice. He led me to a quiet corner of the airport, away from Laura and Emma, who watched us from a distance with unreadable expressions. I thought maybe there was a problem with the tickets, a last-minute change in the itinerary. "Mom," he said, fidgeting with his phone like he used to when he broke something as a child. "There's been a change of plans." I waited for an explanation, my stomach tightening. "The trip? Well, we decided it would be better if it was just for immediate family." "But I'm your family," I whispered, feeling the words get stuck in my throat. "I'm your mother, Michael. What could be more immediate than that?" He ran a hand through his hair, that nervous gesture he had inherited from his father. "It's nothing personal, Mom. It's just that Laura thought it would be more appropriate if Emma came along instead. They have a lot in common. And you? Well, you don't really fit into our plans." Didn't fit. Those words echoed in my head like a painful bell. 45 years after giving birth to this man, raising him, sacrificing my youth, my dreams, my entire life for him, I didn't fit in his plans. "But Michael," my voice trembled, "I've been preparing for weeks. I bought new clothes, rearranged all my appointments, even canceled my doctor visits. I was so excited." "I know, Mom, and I'm sorry, but it's already decided. Emma's coming, and you're going home." We walked back toward Laura and Emma. Laura's friend looked at me with a smile that tried to seem sympathetic, but only came across as condescending. "And I hope you understand," she said. "It's better for everyone this way." Laura stepped forward with that cold elegance that had always intimidated me. She wore a flawless travel outfit, her hair perfectly styled, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dear Anne," she said in that sweet tone she used when guests were around, "it really is for the best. This trip will be very active, lots of walking, physical activities. At your age, you could get hurt." My age. As if I were some decrepit old woman incapable of taking care of myself. As if being 69 automatically made me a burden, a nuisance, something to be tolerated instead of celebrated. "Besides," Laura continued, "Emma and I have so much to plan. We're organizing some events for when we get back, and we need this time to coordinate everything. You wouldn't be interested in that kind of thing." I watched as Michael nodded at every word his wife said, like a puppet. The same boy who once promised he'd always take care of me, who swore I'd never be alone, now stood there silently endorsing every cruel excuse. "But you can take care of the plants while we're gone," Laura added with a smile that pretended to be generous. "And maybe tidy up the house a little. You know how we like to find everything perfect when we return." There was the naked, brutal truth. I wasn't his mother anymore in their eyes. I was their unpaid housekeeper, the convenient woman who kept everything in order while they enjoyed their perfect lives without me. Emma walked toward me, holding the ticket that now had her name instead of mine. "Thank you for understanding, and I really appreciate that you made this trip possible for me." Made it possible for her. As if I had willingly given up my place. As if it had been my decision to hand over my happiness to a stranger. Finally, Michael looked at me again, and for just a moment, I thought I saw a glimpse of the little boy who used to run into my arms when he got hurt, who hugged me when he had nightmares, who once told me I was the best mom in the world. "Mom, please don't look like that. We'll do something special when we get back, I promise." Another empty promise, like all the others he'd made in recent years. Dinners that were cancelled. Visits that were postponed. Calls that never came. The loudspeaker announced the first boarding call for the flight. My flight. The trip I had spent weeks preparing for. The one that had filled my thoughts with hope and joy. Laura took Emma by the arm. "Come on, we need to check in." Then she turned to me one last time. "And call a taxi to go home. And please remember to water the balcony plants." I stood there, suitcase in hand, like a fool, watching them walk away toward the boarding gates. Michael didn't look back. Not even once. Laura walked beside Emma, graceful and elegant as always, chatting animatedly as if nothing had happened. As if they hadn't just shattered the heart of a 69-year-old woman in the middle of a crowded airport. But I stayed there, frozen, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. People rushed past me, dragging their suitcases, hugging their loved ones, living their normal lives while mine was falling apart. A tear rolled down my cheek, then another and another. I couldn't stop them. 50 years of marriage had taught me never to cry in public, to maintain composure, to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the woman who never caused trouble. And yet, there I was, crying like a lost little girl in the middle of the city's biggest airport. "Are you all right, ma'am?" A gentle voice pulled me out of my trance. It was a young airline employee, a woman with kind eyes who looked at me with genuine concern. "Yes," I lied automatically, wiping the tears with the back of my hand. "There's just been a change of plans." She nodded in understanding. She had probably seen this scene 1,000 times before. Families falling apart, dreams breaking, hearts shattering in the most unexpected places. "Do you need help with anything? Maybe changing your ticket?" My ticket, of course. A ticket that now meant nothing, to a destination I could no longer reach, for a trip that no longer included me. "No," I whispered. "There's nothing left to change." I began walking toward the exit, dragging my suitcase across the polished airport floor. Every step was an effort. Every movement required a strength I didn't know I had. The sounds of the airport faded, muffled, like I was walking underwater. When I reached the taxi line, I stopped. Where was I even going? To my empty house. The same 4 walls that had been my prison for the past 5 years since my husband died. To that house where Laura's plants waited to be watered. Where her dirty laundry was probably still piled up. Where her refrigerator needed to be cleaned before her return. "Taxi, ma'am." The driver looked at me impatiently. "Yes," I murmured, giving him my address. The whole ride home, I couldn't stop thinking about Laura's words. "At your age you could get hurt." As if I were some fragile, useless old woman. As if my 69 years were a contagious disease to be avoided. When had they started seeing me that way? When had I allowed others to decide what I could or couldn't do? I thought of my mother, who at 70 had traveled through Europe alone, learned to use computers, and lived every day like an adventure until the end. But I wasn't like her. I had become a smaller, more frightened version of myself. Someone who asked permission just to exist in her own son's life. When I got home, I opened the door, and the silence hit me like a slap. That silence. My constant companion these past years. I dropped my suitcase by the door and went straight to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked defeated. Small, insignificant. It felt like my entire life had led to this moment. This humiliation. This realization that I wasn't even worth the price of a plane ticket. I grabbed my phone to call Julia, my only true friend. The only person who might understand how I felt. But when I dialed her number, I stopped. What could I possibly say? How could I explain that my own son had replaced me with his wife's friend? How could I admit that I had been so foolish to believe they actually wanted me on that trip? I hung up before she could answer. I stood and walked to the closet, where my coral dress hung beside the new shoes I had bought for the trip. I touched them with my fingertips, remembering the excitement I'd felt when I bought them, the hope I'd poured into every choice. And then something inside me broke. It wasn't dramatic, No shouting, no tears of rage. It was quieter, deeper. It was the moment I realized I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love of people who had already decided I didn't deserve it. I took the coral dress and held it in front of me. It was beautiful, elegant. It made me feel radiant. I had bought it to impress a family that saw me as a burden. I had spent money I didn't have on clothes for a trip I was never truly invited to. But for the first time in years, instead of feeling sorry for myself, I felt something different. Anger. A clean, powerful anger that began in my stomach and spread through my whole body like fire. It wasn't anger toward Michael, though part of me despised what he had become. It wasn't even anger toward Laura, though her cruelty had been unnecessary. It was anger toward myself for allowing it, for shrinking, for becoming invisible, for begging for scraps of affection. I took off the clothes I had chosen so carefully for the airport and slipped into the coral dress. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time I liked what I saw. I wasn't a pathetic old woman begging for attention. I was a 69-year-old woman who had raised a son, maintained a marriage for 50 years, survived her husband's death, and deserved far more than what she had been given. I went down to the kitchen still wearing the coral dress. The house felt different now, as if it no longer belonged to them but to me. I looked at Laura's plants on the balcony, the ones she had ordered me to water like her personal gardener. Then I looked at the list she had left taped to the fridge. Clean the house. Do the groceries. Prepare dinner for when we return. I took the list and tore it into tiny pieces. Each piece that fell to the floor was an order I would no longer obey. An expectation I would no longer meet. A chain I had just broken. My phone buzzed. A message from Michael. "Mom, we're on the plane now. Thanks for understanding. Don't forget the plants. Not even a we love you or we'll miss you. Just another reminder about those damn plants." I typed and deleted my response 100 times. I wanted to tell him what I really thought. I wanted to scream that he was a coward. I wanted to ask him when I had stopped being his mother and had become his maid. ChatGPT didn't. Instead, I simply typed, "Have a nice trip." Then I turned off my phone, walked to my desk, and pulled out the checkbook I hadn't used in months. I needed to get out of there, to go somewhere, anywhere that wasn't that house full of obligations to people who didn't value me. But when I checked my bank account, reality hit me hard. I barely had enough money to cover my expenses for the month. All my financial life had depended on Michael ever since my husband, Kenneth, passed away. He handled the finances. He decided how much I could spend. He controlled every dollar that went in or out. I had become a child again, financially dependent on the generosity of my own son. But then I remembered something. In the back of my closet, inside an old shoebox, I had kept a pile of documents I'd never gone through after my husband's death. Michael had taken care of all the paperwork, but I had saved a few papers without telling him. I ran upstairs and found the box. My hands trembled as I went through old invoices, receipts, and documents I didn't completely understand. And then, at the very bottom, I found an envelope sealed with my name written in my husband's handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside there was a letter and several legal documents. The letter read, "My dear Anne, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. There are things I never told you because I didn't want to worry you, but you need to know them now. The aviation company I inherited from my father was never sold, despite what we told Michael. It's in your name now. The documents are in the bank safe. The code is your birth date. You're richer than you think. Use that money to be happy, not to please others. I'll love you forever. Kenneth." My heart stopped. An aviation company. Safe deposit box. Which? None of it made sense. My husband had been an accountant, a modest man who lived off his monthly salary. How could there be an entire company I didn't know about? I looked through the legal papers. And there it was. My name listed as the sole owner of Sunair, a company that, according to the documents, operated both domestic and international routes. The date on the paperwork was just 6 months before my husband's death. I sat on the closet floor, holding the papers in trembling hands. My entire life had been a lie. While I had been scraping by on a small pension, begging for attention from my son, worrying about every dollar I spent, I was the owner of an airline. I called the bank immediately. After verifying my identity, they confirmed that I did, in fact, have a safe deposit box under my name, and that I could access it any time. An hour later, I was standing at the bank, still wearing my coral dress, in front of a metal door that was about to change my life forever. Inside were more documents, bank statements with numbers that made my head spin, and another letter from my husband explaining why he had kept everything secret. I didn't want Michael to know about the company until he was older and wiser. I feared he might become dependent on easy money. But now that I'm gone, the decision is yours. The current CEO, George Miller, has been running everything. He'll explain the details. I picked up the office phone and dialed the number written on the documents. "Mrs. Anne," a man's excited voice said. "I've been waiting for your call for 5 years. Your husband asked me to keep the company running until you were ready." "Ready for what?" I asked, still in shock. "To take control of your company, ma'am. You're the owner of one of the most successful airlines in the country. Would you like to meet to discuss your options?" 2 hours later, I was sitting in a luxurious downtown office, listening as George explained that I was a multimillionaire, that my company employed hundreds of people, that I owned planes flying across the continent at that very moment. "And my son never knew any of this?" I asked. "Your husband was very clear," George said. "No one was to know until you decided what to do with the information." I thought of Michael, flying right then to his tropical destination, sending me texts about watering plants, treating me like a maid, while I owned the airline he was flying on. "George," I said with a smile I hadn't felt in years, "I need you to check something for me." "Of course, ma'am. Do we have information about Flight 347 to Cancun that departed this morning?" "Yes, ma'am. That's one of our flights." He glanced at his computer. "Passenger list. The Henderson family, 3 passengers. Is there a problem?" "Not exactly a problem," I said, smiling wider. "But I think it's time they met the real owner of the airline, George." I looked through the documents confirming my ownership of Sunair. "I'd like you to do me a very special favor. Flight 347. Give me all the passenger details." His fingers flew across the keyboard. "Henderson family," he muttered. "Michael Henderson, Laura Henderson, and—" Interesting. And Emma Collins added at the last minute, replacing someone named and Henderson. And Henderson. My name, the ticket I never used, the trip I'd been excluded from, the adventure stolen from me. But now, sitting in that elegant office, surrounded by the financial statements of my company, everything had changed. "What kind of special services do we offer our VIP passengers?" asked, smiling. "Well, ma'am," George replied, "we can upgrade them to first class, offer gourmet meals, access to our exclusive lounges, and of course personalized greetings from the captain when important guests are on board." "Perfect," I said. "Contact the captain of Flight 347. Tell him the owner of the airline is on board, and that she should be greeted personally." George blinked in confusion. "The owner? But you're here with me." "Exactly," I replied, smiling. "Tell him to announce that and Henderson, owner of Sunair Airlines, is on board the flight." George understood instantly. A knowing smile crossed his face. "It will be my pleasure, ma'am." As he made the call to the pilot, I imagined the look on Michael and Laura's faces when they heard my name announced over the plane's intercom. The woman they had humiliated at the airport. The mother who didn't fit in their plans. The old lady they thought might get hurt on the trip. Turned out to be the owner of the airline they were flying on. "All set, ma'am," George said. "Captain Robert Vasquez is honored to make the announcement. He says it's a privilege to know the owner herself is personally overseeing the company's service quality." "Excellent," I replied calmly. "Now, George, tell me everything I need to know about my company." The next 2 hours were a revelation. My husband had inherited a small aviation business from his father, and turned it into an empire. We had contracts with luxury hotels, charter flights for celebrities, and annual revenues higher than anything I could have imagined spending in my entire life. Your husband reinvested all the profits into the company, George explained. He lived modestly so no one would suspect. But, Mrs. Henderson, you are one of the wealthiest women in the country. Meanwhile, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Michael. I let it ring. Laura. I ignored it. Emma. Why would my daughter-in-law's friend be calling me? Finally I picked up. Mrs. Henderson. Emma's voice trembled, nervous and almost frightened. Is it true that you're the owner of this airline? Hello, Emma, I answered, my tone calm and measured, steadier than I knew I was capable of. How are you enjoying your flight? You know, the one that was supposed to be my seat. Oui. Michael's in shock. Laura can't even speak. When the pilot announced that you were the owner, she went completely pale. I can imagine, I said calmly. Finding out that the woman you publicly humiliated is actually your boss. Mrs. Henderson, please. Emma stammered. I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, Emma, I replied, my voice firm and steady. I heard perfectly well when Laura told me to go home because this wasn't for me. I heard Michael tell me I didn't fit into his plans. And I heard you thank me for making your trip possible. A heavy silence filled the line. I could almost picture the scene inside the plane. Michael finally realizing he had betrayed the only person who truly loved him. Laura realizing she had completely underestimated the woman she thought was a burden. And Emma drowning in shame for having taken part in my humiliation. Would you like to speak with Michael? Emma asked, her voice trembling. No, I said firmly. Right now, I'm busy getting to know my company. But tell my son that when he returns from his trip, he and I will have a very serious conversation. I hung up before she could respond. George had been listening quietly. He looked at me with admiration. Ma'am, if I may say so, he began softly, I think your husband would be very proud of you. He always said you were stronger than you realized. Seems he was right. I smiled faintly. Now, George, I need to understand something. How is it possible that Michael never knew about the company? Didn't he ever wonder where the money came from? For his university, his wedding, the apartment we bought him. Your husband was very careful, George explained. He maintained a legitimate accounting business that generated modest income, enough to justify a middle-class lifestyle. The larger expenses were handled through fake loans or occasional bonuses. Michael never questioned it. Of course he hadn't. Michael had accepted every gift, every bit of financial help, every opportunity as something he naturally deserved. He had never once wondered how a modest accountant could afford a private university or an elegant wedding. So, what now, Mrs. Henderson? What are your plans for the company? For the first time in 5 years, I felt something I hadn't felt in forever. Freedom. I didn't depend on my son's charity. I didn't have to beg for his attention. I didn't have to live like a servant in my own life. First, I said, standing up, feeling new strength rush through my veins, I want to learn everything about this company, every plane, every route, every employee. And second, I smiled with a determination I hadn't felt in decades, I want to plan the trip of my life. My phone rang again. Michael. This time I decided to answer. Mom, his voice sounded desperate. We need to talk. Oh, now you want to talk to me, said coolly. How interesting. Please, Mom, I don't understand what's going on. The pilot said you're the owner of the airline. That can't be true, right? Dad was an accountant. We never had much money. Hearing his voice for the first time in years, I didn't feel the old instinct to comfort him, to make him feel better, to minimize my pain just to protect his feelings. Instead, I felt a strange, almost icy calm. Your father was many things you never knew, Michael, I said quietly. And apparently so was I. But Mom, if you really own an airline, why did you live like you had no money? That question hit harder than I expected. Why hadn't I known? Why had I spent 5 years living like a poor widow, depending on my son's charity? When I was, in fact, a wealthy and independent woman. Because your father wanted to protect you, I said finally. He wanted you to grow into a hard-working, humble man before learning the truth about our finances. But he died before he could tell you, and you decided to keep lying. His accusatory tone made my blood boil. Even now, even after discovering he had humiliated the owner of an airline, Michael still found a way to make me feel guilty. I didn't know anything, Michael, I said sharply. I just found out today, right after you left me stranded at the airport like I was garbage. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear voices in the background, probably Laura, asking what was happening. Mom, he said finally, Laura wants to talk to you. I'm not interested in what Laura has to say. I cut him off. She already said everything I needed to hear this morning at the airport. Please, Mom. She's really sorry. We all are. Sorry. Sorry for what exactly, Michael? For humiliating me in public? For treating me like your maid? Or are you sorry because you just found out that the woman you look down on happens to be a millionaire? There was another long pause. The silence itself was my answer. Mom, you know we love you. It was just a misunderstanding. I didn't interrupt him, but my voice came out colder than I intended. There was no misunderstanding. For years, I've been treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. I've accepted scraps of attention, begged for an invitation to my own son's table, lived waiting for the crumbs of affection you decided to give me. George watched me from across his desk, clearly impressed by the conversation unfolding before him. He gestured, asking if I wanted privacy, but I shook my head. I needed witnesses for this moment. Mom, please, Michael pleaded. When we come back, we can fix all this. We can talk. We can. What, Michael? I interrupted. Pretend nothing happened. Pretend you didn't tell me I didn't fit into your plans. Pretend Laura didn't order me to go home like a scolded child. It was a mistake, Mom. Laura was stressed about the trip. I was nervous about work. We weren't thinking straight. There it was again, excuses, justifications, anything but a real apology. Anything but admitting that they had deliberately hurt me. You know what, Michael? I said finally, my voice steady, calm, resolute. You're right about one thing. I don't fit into your plans. But it turns out, I no longer need to fit into anyone's plans. What do you mean? He asked cautiously. I mean, I said slowly, that starting this afternoon I'm going to make my own plans. I'm going to learn everything about my company. I'm going to travel to every place I ever dreamed of visiting. And I'm going to live the life I deserve, not the one you decided I should have. There was a shuffle, and then a different voice came on the line. Smaller, shakier than before. And, it's Laura. Her tone was nothing like the confident, patronizing voice I'd heard that morning at the airport. I wanted to apologize for what happened this morning. I truly didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to hurt me, I repeated, my tone edged with disbelief. Laura, you told me to go home because it wasn't for me. You treated me like your maid. You gave me orders about watering plants and cleaning the house. What part of that, I asked coldly, wasn't meant to hurt me? I thought you'd understand, Laura said through tears. The trip was important for Emma and me. We had things to plan. And what am I in your mind, Laura? I interrupted. A burden. A senile old woman who gets in the way. No, of course not. You're Michael's mother. Exactly, I said sharply. I'm Michael's mother. Not your maid, not your babysitter, not your gardener. I'm the mother of the man who claims to love you. And you treated me like I was nothing. I could hear Laura begin to cry. A part of me, the part trained for decades to comfort others, wanted to tell her everything was fine, that I forgave her, that we could forget what had happened. But that part of me had died that morning at the airport. Laura, I continued, my voice sounding unfamiliar even to myself, for years you've been pushing Michael away from me. You've turned every family gathering into a competition where I always lose. You've made my own son see me as a burden instead of his mother. That's not true. It's completely true. And the worst part, I said bitterly, is that Michael has allowed it. My own son has chosen your comfort over my dignity, time and time again. Michael had taken the phone back. Mom, please. When we get back, everything's going to change, I promise. No, I said, surprising even myself with the strength in my voice. I don't need your promises anymore, Michael. I don't need to wait for you to decide to include me in your life. I don't need to beg for crumbs of your attention. What are you saying? I'm saying that for the first time in 5 years I feel free. Free from expectations, free from disappointment, free from the desperate need to earn the love of people who have clearly decided I don't deserve it. George slipped me a note. Flight lands in 3 hours. Any special instructions? I smiled as I read it. Michael was still talking, pleading, promising changes we both knew would never come. Michael, I interrupted. Enjoy the rest of your trip. When you get home, you'll find your house exactly as you left it. Don't worry, Mom, he said quickly. The plants. But I won't be there waiting for you. Hung up. And for the first time in years, I felt a silence that didn't scare me. It was a silence full of possibility instead of emptiness and loneliness. George, I said, turning toward him, I need your help with something. When that flight lands, I want a surprise waiting for my guests. He raised an eyebrow. What kind of surprise, ma'am? I want them to know exactly who I am. Not the pathetic woman they humiliated this morning, but the owner of the company that just gave them the trip of their lives. George smiled knowingly. You're thinking of a special reception. Exactly. I want them to step off that plane and fully understand what they've done. We spent the next hour planning every detail. George contacted the airport manager in Cancun, arranged a VIP reception, and made sure that Michael, Laura, and Emma would know precisely who had made every moment of their luxurious flight possible. Meanwhile, I made a decision I had been avoiding for 5 years. I called Julia my only real friend, the woman I'd known since college, who had always told me the truth, even when it hurt to hear it. Anne, she said in surprise when she picked up. How are you? I thought you'd be on some exotic trip with Michael. Julia, I need to tell you something. Can you come see me? Of course. Are you okay? You sound different. I'm more than okay, I said. For the first time in years, I'm awake. An hour later, Julia sat in my living room, her eyes growing wider as I told her everything. The humiliation at the airport, the discovery of the airline, the phone confrontation with Michael and Laura. My God, Anne, she murmured when I finished. I always knew Laura was venomous, but this is cruel even for her. Why did you never tell me what you really thought of her? Julia sighed. Because you defended her. Every time I tried to point out how she treated you, you made excuses for her. You said she was young, that she was adjusting, that Michael was happy. She was right. I had spent years justifying Laura's behavior, downplaying her insults, convincing myself I was too sensitive, too demanding, too needy. And Michael, Julia continued, that boy you raised. He's become a man who lets his wife treat his mother like garbage. Her words hurt because they were true. The sweet little boy I had raised, the one who once promised he'd always take care of me, had become a stranger who chose the comfort of his marriage over the respect of his mother. But now things are different, I said. I have options I never knew I had. I have power I never realized I possessed. And what are you going to do with that power? She asked. It was a good question. What was I going to do? Part of me wanted revenge. To use my new position to make Michael and Laura pay for every year of humiliation. But another part of me, deeper and wiser, wanted something else. I want to live, I said finally. I want to live as the woman I am, not as the pathetic shadow I had become. Julia smiled. That's the Anne I knew in college, the brave, independent woman who feared nothing. You really were that woman. You were incredible. You were the only one who dared to challenge professors when they were wrong, the one who organized protests, the one who defended the shy girls when they were bullied. I struggled to remember that version of myself. 45 years of marriage and motherhood had buried the rebellious and beneath layers of compliance and self-sacrifice. "You know what's the saddest part?" I said softly. "I spent so much time trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect mother-in-law, that I forgot to just be me." "It's not too late to remember who you are," Julia said gently. My phone rang. It was George again. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, "I have news from Cancun Airport. The flight has landed, and your guests received the full message about who you really are." "And how did they react?" I asked. "According to the airport manager," George replied, "Michael looked completely devastated. Laura couldn't stop crying. And Emma looked like she wanted to disappear. They were given a letter I had dictated and a special itinerary for the rest of their stay. The letter was simple but crystal clear. It explained that every luxury they were enjoying, the 5-star hotel, the private excursions, the gourmet dinners, was courtesy of the very woman they had humiliated that morning. It told them they could enjoy the trip they had stolen from me, but that when they returned, they would find a very different world waiting for them. "And the special itinerary?" I asked. "Each activity," said George, "includes a small plaque that reads, 'Courtesy of An Henderson, owner of Sunair Airlines.' The hotel manager will constantly remind them that everything they're enjoying is thanks to the generosity of the woman they excluded from the trip." I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't exactly revenge, but it was poetic justice. "Perfect," I said. "Now, George, I want you to arrange something for me. The best trip you can plan. I don't care about the cost, I don't care about the distance. I want to see every place I ever dreamed of visiting. When do you want to leave, ma'am?" I looked at Julia, who was watching me with a proud smile. I looked around my house, filled with memories of a life that no longer felt like mine. Then I looked out the window, toward a world finally ready to be explored. "Tomorrow," I said. "I want to leave tomorrow." Julia clapped her hands. "And can I go with you? You'd leave everything to come with me on an adventure?" "My dear," she said, grinning, "I've been waiting for that invitation for 50 years. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt like my life was beginning, not ending." The next morning, I woke up with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Pure excitement for the day ahead. Not the nervous anxiety of wondering if Michael would call, or the constant worry of whether I had somehow upset Laura. No. This was the clean, unfiltered thrill of a woman who had finally regained control of her own life. Julia arrived early, carrying 2 suitcases and a smile she couldn't contain. "Ready to conquer the world?" she asked as she stepped into my house. "More than ready," I replied, and for the first time in a long time, my words carried the weight of truth. George had worked all night preparing our itinerary. First stop, Paris, the city I had always dreamed of visiting but never could. It was always too expensive, or Michael needed the money for something else. Then Venice, then Japan. And finally, a week at a private resort in the Maldives. "Ma'am," George said over the phone, "I've reserved the presidential suite in every hotel. You'll have private drivers, personal guides, and access to experiences normally reserved for royalty." As I packed, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Michael called every half hour. Laura sent desperate text messages. Even Emma tried to reach me. Everyone wanted to talk, to explain, to justify. But I no longer needed their explanations. For the first time in my adult life, other people's opinions of my choices didn't matter. "Are you going to answer them?" Julia asked as she watched me ignore another call from Michael. "Eventually," I said, smiling. "But not until I've fully remembered who I am, without them." A limousine arrived at noon. The driver was an older man named Isaiah, an employee of my airline who had worked for my husband for 20 years, without me even knowing it. "Mrs. Henderson," he greeted me warmly. "Your husband used to talk about you all the time. He always said you were the strongest woman he knew, but that you'd forgotten your own strength." His words touched me deeply. My husband had seen something in me that I had lost sight of, something I had buried under years of compliance and self-sacrifice. At the airport, everything was different from the humiliation of the day before. We were greeted like royalty, escorted through private halls, treated with the respect that the owner of the airline deserved. The contrast with the previous 24 hours was so dramatic that it almost felt like a dream. The captain, the same one who had announced my name the day before, greeted me personally. "Mrs. Henderson," he said with a genuine smile, "it's an honor to have you on board your own plane." Your own plane. Those words echoed in my mind as I took my seat in first class. This was my plane, my company, my life finally being lived on my own terms. During the flight to Paris, Julia and I talked more deeply than we had in years. She told me about her divorce 5 years earlier, about how she had regained her independence, about the trips she'd taken alone and the things she'd learned about herself. "You know what's most liberating?" she said as we sipped champagne high above the Atlantic. "Realizing you don't need anyone's approval to be happy." She was right. 4 decades I had lived chasing approval, first from my husband, then from Michael, then from Laura. I had measured my worth by how pleased others were with me, by how useful I was, by how little I inconvenienced anyone. My phone vibrated with another message from Laura. "And please, we need to talk. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. Michael is devastated." I showed the message to Julia. She read it and shook her head. "Now that they know you have money, suddenly it's all a misunderstanding." "Exactly," I said. "Yesterday, I was a troublesome old woman who didn't fit into their plans. Today, I'm the victim of a terrible misunderstanding." I typed a short reply. "Enjoy the rest of your trip. We'll talk when I return." But deep down I knew that when I returned, if I ever returned, I would be a completely different woman. We landed in Paris beneath a golden sunset sky. The city stretched before us like a fulfilled promise, like a dream finally realized. Not because it was Paris, but because it represented everything I had ever desired, and never allowed myself to have. At the hotel, our suite was larger than my entire house. It had a view of the Eiffel Tower, a grand piano, and fresh flowers in every room. The manager greeted us personally, offered champagne, and assured us that anything we needed would be available 24 hours a day. "Can you believe this is real?" I asked Julia as we stood on the balcony, gazing at the glowing city. "My dear," she said softly, "this isn't just real, this is what you deserve. This is what you always deserved." That night, we dined in the hotel's Michelin star restaurant, where every dish was a work of art. We didn't talk about Michael. We didn't talk about Laura. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about the future, about the places we wanted to see, the experiences we wanted to live. "You know what's the most incredible thing about all this?" I asked as we savored a dessert almost too beautiful to eat. "What?" "That, for the first time in my life, I'm doing something entirely for myself. Not to please anyone, not to meet anyone's expectations, not to earn anyone's love. Just for me." Julia raised her glass. "To the new Anne," she said. "To the woman who was always there, just waiting to be rediscovered." We toasted under the Paris lights. 2 women, nearly 70 years old, who had finally understood that life doesn't end when others decide you're no longer important. Sometimes real life begins exactly at that moment. 3 weeks later, I returned home a completely changed woman. Not just because of the incredible places I had visited or the experiences I had lived, but because of something far deeper. I had remembered who I was before I became the shadow of everyone else's needs. Paris had rekindled my love for art and culture. Venice had taught me that beauty exists to be lived, not just admired from afar. Japan had shown me the dignity that comes from valuing yourself. And the Maldives had given me the gift of inner silence, that peaceful stillness that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. But the real change had happened during those long midnight conversations with Julia, in moments of solitude watching sunrises from places I had once thought unreachable, in the gradual realization that I had spent decades living a life that wasn't truly mine. Michael was waiting for me when I arrived home. He looked thinner, older, as if the past few weeks had been hard on him. Laura wasn't there, which didn't surprise me. "Mom," he said as I set my suitcases down by the door. "We need to talk." "You're right," I replied. We do need to talk, but this time I'll speak first. I sat down in my favorite chair in my living room, in my home that finally felt like mine again. Michael sat across from me, nervous, like a little boy who knows he's in trouble. For 45 years, I began. I was the kind of mother I thought I was supposed to be. I gave you everything I had. I sacrificed my dreams for yours. I made myself small so you could shine. And when your father died, I kept doing the same thing, because I thought that's what a good mother does. Michael tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand. I'm not finished. When Laura came into our lives, I let her push me aside because I thought a good mother-in-law should step back. I accepted scraps of attention because I thought it was better than nothing. I became a spectator in my own son's life because I thought that was love. Mom, I never meant. But you did mean it, Michael. Every time Laura disrespected me and you stayed silent, you made a choice. Every time you let her treat me like a housekeeper, you were deciding what kind of man you wanted to be. And that morning at the airport, when you told me I didn't fit into your plans, you finally showed me exactly where I stood in your new life. Tears streamed down his face, but I felt strangely calm. I wasn't speaking from anger or pain anymore. I was speaking from clarity. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry for everything. Laura's sorry too. She wanted to come and apologize, but I thought it was better if we talked first. Laura's sorry, I repeated quietly. Or is she sorry she discovered that the woman she humiliated turned out to be a millionaire? Michael couldn't answer. His silence said everything. Michael, you're my son, and I'll always love you. But I will no longer live my life waiting for scraps of your attention. I won't be treated as a second-class citizen in my own family. What does that mean? It means things are going to change. First of all, I'm moving out. His eyes widened. You're moving out. Where to? I've bought an apartment downtown, close to my company's offices. I'm going to be actively involved in running the airline. Your father built something incredible, and it's time I got to know it. But Mom, this is your home. I grew up here. All our memories are here. This house is full of memories, I said softly, of a woman I no longer am. The new and needs a new place. I told him about my plans. I was going to start a foundation to help older women who had lost themselves in the expectations of others. I was going to travel regularly, exploring the world that had been waiting for me for decades. I was going to live each day as a gift, not as an obligation. And what about us? He asked in a small voice. What happens to our relationship? That depends on you, Michael. If you want a relationship with me, it will be on terms of mutual respect. I will no longer tolerate Laura's contempt. I will no longer accept being treated as a burden. And I will no longer beg for your attention. Laura really wants to change. Laura wants to keep access to the family wealth she just discovered, I said calmly. There's a difference. We talked for hours. Michael cried, apologized, and promised things would be different. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to go back to being the forgiving, accommodating mother who always let everything slide. But I had learned something important in those 3 weeks. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing the same disrespect again. I love you, Michael, I told him as he prepared to leave. But for the first time in my life, I love myself more, and that's not going to change. After he left, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, looking at the plants Laura had once ordered me to water. They were perfect, green, vibrant, blooming. I had cared for them, but not out of obligation. I had cared for them because I liked watching them grow. My phone rang. It was George with updates on a new company project. As we talked about expansions and future plans, I realized something wonderful. For the first time in decades, I was excited about tomorrow. 6 months later, my new life was fully in place. My apartment was a sanctuary of peace and beauty. My work at the airline gave me purpose and fulfillment. My foundation had already helped 50 women rediscover their self-worth. Michael visited regularly, alone. Laura had tried to reach out several times, but I had been clear. Respect isn't negotiable. Concerned. Are you happy, Mom? Michael asked during one of our monthly dinners. I'm free, I replied. And freedom, when you finally find it after decades of living without it, feels a lot like happiness. That night, I wrote in my journal, at 69, I learned that it's never too late to choose your own life. That true love begins with yourself. And that sometimes, the greatest adventures begin exactly when you think everything is over. The woman who had once been humiliated in an airport no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who lived her dreams, and who finally understood that the most extraordinary life is the one you choose to live for yourself. 2 years later, I stood on the deck of my private yacht, sailing through the crystal waters of the Mediterranean. Julia sat beside me reading a book, while Gabriel, one of my most trusted employees, guided us toward the next Greek island we wanted to explore. The afternoon sun painted golden reflections across the water, and for a moment I paused to take it all in. How surreal this new reality felt. My phone buzzed with a message, surprisingly from Emma. And I wanted to thank you. Watching what you did inspired me to leave my abusive husband. I now run my own catering company, and for the first time in 15 years I feel alive. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to change. I smiled as I read it. Over the past 2 years I had received hundreds of similar messages, from women of all ages who had seen my story in magazines, who had heard about the foundation in the news, who had decided that they too deserved more than they were getting. Each message was a reminder that my pain had served a purpose greater than myself. My relationship with Michael had found a new, surprisingly healthy balance. We met for dinner every 2 weeks, on my terms in places I chose. He had started therapy to understand how he had allowed his marriage to damage our relationship. Laura had finally realized that her past behavior was unacceptable. Our relationship would never be warm, but at least it was respectful. She had learned to call me by my name instead of pretending I wasn't there, and she no longer gave me orders about plants or chores. "What are you thinking about?" Julia asked, noticing my contemplative smile. "How strange life is," I replied. The worst day of my life turned out to be the first day of my real one. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be sailing through Greece on my own yacht, I would have thought they were insane. Julia closed her book and joined me by the railing. "You know what amazes me the most about all this?" "What?" "That you didn't change to get revenge on Michael and Laura. You changed for yourself. That's the difference between a real transformation and just a tantrum with money." She was right. During those first months after the airport incident, I had felt the temptation to use my new wealth to make them pay. I could have taken Michael's job away. I could have made Laura feel as small as she had made me feel. But I had learned something vital. Revenge keeps you tied to your pain, while liberation lets you move forward. That evening, as we dined at a seaside restaurant in Santorini, an older woman approached our table with hesitant steps. She wore a simple but clean dress, and her eyes held that familiar look, the look of someone who had lived too long feeling invisible. "Are you and Henderson?" she asked softly. "I read about you in a magazine my granddaughter showed me. I'm 75, and my family treats me exactly the way you described in that interview. Do you really think it's not too late for me?" I took her wrinkled hand in mine and said gently, "Life doesn't come with an expiration date, only moments of awakening. Yours can start today if you decide it should." Her eyes filled with tears, not of despair but of hope. She told me her story over the next 20 minutes. A widow, financially dependent on her son, treated like a free nanny for her grandchildren, ignored in every family decision. "My son says I should be grateful he lets me live in his house," she whispered. "But that house was mine before I gave it to him." I handed her my business card and the contact for Laura Green, the director of my foundation. "Call her tomorrow. We have programs for women in your exact situation. You're not alone, and it is definitely not too late." The woman walked away with a smile she probably hadn't shown in years, and I felt deeply grateful once again, for having turned my pain into purpose. That night I wrote in my journal, "I've discovered that true legacy isn't the money you leave behind, or the companies you build. It's the number of people you inspire to value themselves." It's showing other women that their story doesn't end when others decide they no longer matter. It's proving that dignity isn't something others give you, it's something you claim. The next day, as we sailed toward Mykonos, I received an excited call from George. "Mrs. Henderson, we have several incredible proposals," he said. "A global television network wants to make a documentary about your story and the foundation. Publishing house wants to release a book about your journey. And a group of universities wants you to give talks on personal reinvention after 60. What's all this for?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "To show the world," he said, "that reinvention has no age limit. That dignity isn't negotiable. And that sometimes, the most beautiful beginnings start with the most painful rejections." I looked out at the endless horizon stretching before us, full of possibilities I was only beginning to explore. I thought of the Anne from 2 years ago, the woman standing in an airport with a broken heart, convinced her life was over. If I could speak to her now, I would tell her, "The pain you're feeling isn't the end of your story, it's the prologue to its best chapter." "Say yes to everything," I told George, "but with one condition. The message must be crystal clear. Doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how long you've lived for others. It doesn't matter how many times you've been made to feel invisible or insignificant. It is never too late to start living for yourself." Julia clapped her hands. "That's going to be a speech worth hearing." That evening, as the yacht rocked gently in the bay, I received an unexpected call from Michael. His voice sounded different, more mature, more reflective. "Mom, I wanted to tell you something," he said. "Laura and I are seeing a marriage counselor. We're working on our behavior patterns, especially how we treat the people we love." "I'm glad to hear that, Michael," I said. Then he hesitated. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me completely?" The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on rebuilding my own life that I hadn't thought much about forgiveness. "Michael," I said after a pause, "I've already forgiven you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean allowing the same behavior again. It means choosing not to carry resentment, because it's too heavy for the new life I'm building." "And us?" he asked quietly. "Our relationship." "Our relationship is better than ever," I said softly, "because for the first time it's based on mutual respect, not on my desperation for your approval." When I hung up, I realized that conversation had closed the final chapter of my old life. I was no longer the mother begging for crumbs of affection. I was a whole woman who had chosen a healthy relationship with her adult son. As the sun set over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in orange and rose, I thought of all the women who, at that very moment, felt invisible, who believed their best days were behind them, who thought they didn't deserve more than what they'd been given. Because that was the truth I had learned at 69. That a cruel rejection had given me the greatest gift of all, my own life, finally lived on my own terms.